And finally, the ultimate colluders in the legitimizing of pornography, of course, are the consumers. In 1979, we had a $4 billion a year industry in this country. By 1985, it was an $8 billion a year industry. Those consumers include men in all walks of life: lawyers, politicians, writers, professors, owners of media, police, doctors, maybe even commissioners on presidential commissions. No one really knows, do they? And no matter where we look, we can't find the consumers. But what we learned is the meaning of first-class citizenship. And the meaning of first-class citizenship is that you can use your authority as men and as professionals to protect pornography, both by developing arguments to protect it and by using real social and economic power to protect it. And as a result of all of this, the harm to women remains invisible. Even though we have the bodies, the harm to women remains invisible. Underlying the invisibility of this harm is an assumption that what is done to women is natural. That even if a woman is forced to do something, somehow it falls within the sphere of her natural responsibilities as a woman. When the same things are done to boys, those things are perceived as an outrage. They are called unnatural. But if you force a woman to do something that she was born to do, then the violence to her is not perceived as a real violation of her. In addition, the harm to women of pornography is invisible because most sexual abuse still occurs in private, even though we have this photographic documentation of it called the pornography industry. Women are extremely isolated. Women don't have credibility. Women are not believed by people who make social policy. In addition, the harm of pornography remains invisible because women have been historically excluded from the protections of the Constitution. And as a result, the violations of our human rights, when they don't occur in equal and opposite numbers to men, have not been recognized or taken seriously, and we do not have remedies for them under law. In addition, pornography is invisible in its harm to women because women are poorer than men, and many of the women exploited in pornography are very poor. Many of them are illiterate. And because there is a great deal of female compliance with brutality, and the compliance is based on fear, it's based on powerlessness, and it is based on a reaction to the very real violence of the pornographers. And finally, the harm is invisible because of the smile. Because women are made to smile. Women aren't just made to do the sex acts. We're made to smile while we do them. And so you will find in pornography women penetrating themselves with swords or daggers, and you will see the smile. You will see things that cannot be done to a human being, that are done only to men in political circumstances of torture. And you will see a woman forced to smile. And the smile will be believed, and the injury to her as a human being, to her body, and to her heart, and to her soul will not be believed. Now, we have been told that we have an argument here about speech, not about women being hurt. And yet the emblem of that argument is a woman bound and gagged, and we're supposed to believe that that's speech. Who is that speech for? We have women being tortured, and we're told that that's somebody's speech. Whose speech is it? It's the speech of a pimp. It's not the speech of a woman. The only words we hear in pornography from women are that women want to be hurt, ask to be hurt, like to be raped, get sexual pleasure from sexual violence. And even when a woman is covered in filth, we're supposed to believe that her speech is that she likes it and she wants more of it. The reality for women in this society is that pornography creates silence for women. The pornographers silence women. Our bodies are their language. Their speech is made out of our exploitation, our subservience, our injury, and our pain, and they can't say anything without hurting us. And when you protect them, you protect only their right to exploit and hurt us. Pornography is a civil rights issue for women because pornography sexualizes inequality, because it turns women into subhuman creatures. Pornography is a civil rights issue for women because it is the systematic exploitation of a group of people because of a condition of birth. Pornography creates bigotry and hostility and aggression towards all women, targets all women without exception. Pornography is the suppression of us through sexual exploitation and abuse so that we have no real means to achieve civil equality. And the issue here is simple. It is not complex. People are being hurt, and you can help them or you can help those who are hurting them. We need civil rights legislation that recognizes pornography as a violation of the civil rights of women. We need it because civil rights legislation recognizes the fact that the harm here is to human beings. We need that recognition. We need civil rights legislation because it puts the power to act in the hands of the people who have been forced into pornographized powerlessness. And that's a special kind of powerlessness. That's a powerlessness that is supposed to be a form of sexual pleasure. We need civil rights legislation because only those to whom it has happened know what has happened. They're the people who are the experts. They have the knowledge. They know what has happened, how it's happened. Only they can really articulate from beginning to end the reality of pornography as a human rights injury. We need civil rights legislation because it gives us something back after what the pornographers have taken from us. The motivation to fight back keeps people alive. People need it for their dignity, for their ability to continue to exist as citizens in a country that needs their creativity and needs their presence and needs the existence that has been taken from them by the pornographers. We need civil rights legislation because as social policy, it says to a population of people that they have human worth. They have human worth. That this society recognizes that they have human worth. We need it because it's the only legislative remedy thus far that is drawn narrowly enough to confront the human rights issues for people who are being exploited and discriminated against without becoming an instrument of police power to suppress real expression. We need the civil rights legislation because the process of civil discovery is a very important one and will give us a great deal of information for potential criminal prosecutions against organized crime and prosecutors. And I ask you to look at the example of the Southern Poverty Law Center and their Klan Watch project where they have used civil suits to get criminal indictments against the Klan. And finally, we need civil rights legislation because the only really dirty word in this society is the word women. And a civil rights approach says that this society repudiates the brutalization of women. We are against obscenity laws. We don't want them. And I want you to understand why, whether you end up agreeing with it or not. Number one, the pornographers use them as part of their formula for making pornography. All they need to do is to provide some literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, and they can hang women from the rafters as long as they manage to meet that formula. It doesn't matter what they do to women. And in the old days, when obscenity laws were still being enforced in many places, for instance, the most sadomasochistic pornography, the genitals were always covered because if the genitals were covered, that wouldn't kick off a police prosecution. Number two, the use of the prurient interest standard. However it is construed in this new era when the Supreme Court has taken two synonyms, lasciviousness and lust, and said that they mean different things, which is mind-boggling in and of itself. Whatever it is construed to mean, the reaction of jurors to material, whether they're supposed to be aroused or whether they're not allowed to be aroused, whatever the instructions of the court is, has nothing to do with the objective reality of what is happening to the women in the pornography. The third reason that obscenity law cannot work for us is that what do community standards mean in a society when violence against women is pandemic? When, according to the FBI, a woman is battered every 18 seconds and it's the most commonly committed violent crime in the country? What would community standards have meant in a segregated South? What would community standards have meant as we approach the atrocity of Nazi Germany? What are community standards in a society where women are persecuted for being women and pornography is a form of political persecution? Obscenity laws are also woman-hating in their construction. Their basic presumption is that it's women's bodies that are dirty. The standards of obscenity law don't acknowledge the reality of the technology. They were drawn up in a society where obscenity was construed to be essentially writing and drawing. And now what we have is a mass production in a way that real people are being hurt, and a consumption of real people by a real technology. And obscenity laws are not adequate to that reality. And finally, obscenity laws at the discretion of police and prosecutors will keep obscenity out of the public view. But it remains available to men in private. It remains available to individual men. It remains available to all male groups. And whenever it's used, it still creates bigotry and hostility and aggression towards all women. It's still used in sexual abuse as part of sexual abuse. And it's still made through coercion, through blackmail, and through exploitation. Now I'm going to ask you to do several things. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to listen to women who want to talk to you about what's happened to them. Please listen to them. They know how this works. You're asking people to speculate. They know it's happened to them. I'm going to ask you to make these recommendations. The first recommendation that I would like you to make is to have the Justice Department instruct law enforcement agencies to keep records of the use of pornography in violent crimes, murder, including sexual assault after death, to take note of those murders that are committed for sexual reasons, to keep a track, for instance, of suicides of teenage boys in the place of pornography in those suicides. They should keep track of both the use of pornography before and during the commission of a violent crime and the presence of pornography at a violent crime. And I want to say that a lot of the information that we have about what you were calling a correlation doesn't come from law enforcement officials. It comes from the testimony of sex offenders. That's how we know that pornography is meaningful in the commission of sexual offenses. And have the FBI report that information in the Uniform Crime Reports so that we begin to get some real standard here. Number two, get pornography out of all federal prisons. It's like sending dynamite to terrorists. Those people have committed violent crimes against women. They consume pornography. They come back out on the street. The recidivism rate is unbelievable. Not to mention that prison is a rape-saturated society. What about the rights of those men who are being raped in prisons and the relationship of pornography to the rapes of them? No one should be sentenced to a life of hell being raped in a prison. You can do something about it by getting the pornography out of prisons. Number three, enforce laws against pimping and pandering. Against pornographers. Pandering is paying for sex to make pornography of it. And a panderer is any person who procures another person for the purposes of prostitution. This law has been enforced against pornographers in California. Prosecute the makers of pornography under pimping and pandering laws. Number four, make it a Justice Department priority. The enforcement of RICO against the pornography industry. Racketeering activity means, as you know, any act or even a threat involving murder, kidnapping, extortion, any trafficking in coerced women, which for reasons that are incomprehensible to me is still called white slaving. Although the women are Asian, the women are black, all women are being trafficked in this way. This is how pornographers do their business, both in relation to women and in relation to distributing their product. And RICO, if it were enforced against the industry, could do a great deal toward breaking the industry up. Number 5, please recommend that federal civil rights legislation recognizing pornography as a virulent and vicious form of sex discrimination be passed, that it be a civil law, it can be a separate act, or it can be amended as a separate title under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We want the equal protection of the 14th Amendment to apply to women, the principles underlying the 14th Amendment. This is the way to do it. We want a definition of pornography that is based on the reality of pornography, which is that it is the act of sexual subordination of women. The causes of action need to include trafficking, coercion, forcing pornography on a person, and assault or physical injury due to a specific piece of pornography. I also want to ask you to consider creating a criminal conspiracy provision under the civil rights law such that conspiring to deprive a person of their civil rights by coercing them into pornography is a crime, and that conspiring to traffic in pornography is conspiring to deprive women of our civil rights. And finally, I would like to ask you to think about pornography in the context of international law. We have claims to make. Women have claims to make under international law. Pornographers violate the rights of women under internationally recognized principles of law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person, that no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, that everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. It also says that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms, and in international law, the trafficking in women has long been recognized as a form of slave trading. President Carter signed, and I am asking you to recommend that Congress ratify the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which includes the following article, Article 6. State parties shall take all appropriate measures, including legislation, to suppress all forms of traffic in women and exploitation of prostitution of women. That gives the United States government an affirmative obligation to act against the traffic in women. This is an international problem, and it requires, in part, an international solution. I'm also asking you to acknowledge the international reality of this, and this is a human rights issue for a very personal reason, which is that my grandparents came here, Jews fleeing from Russia, Jews fleeing from Hungary. Those who did not come to this country were all killed, either in pogroms or by the Nazis. They came here for me. I live here, and I live in a country where women are tortured as a form of public entertainment and for profit, and that torture is upheld as a state-protected right. Now, that is unbearable. I am here asking the simplest thing. I'm saying hurt people need remedies, not platitudes, not laws that you know already don't work. People excluded from constitutional protections need equality. People silenced by exploitation and brutality need real speech, not to be told that when they're hung from meat hooks, that is their speech. And nobody in this country who's been working to do anything about pornography, no woman who has spoken out against it, is going to go backwards, is going to forget what she's learned, is going to forget that she's got rights that aren't being acknowledged in this country. And there are lots of people in this country, I'm happy to say, who want to live in a kind world, not in a cruel world, and they will not accept the hatred of women as good, wholesome American fun. They won't accept the hatred of women and the rape of women as anybody's idea of freedom. They won't accept the torture of women as a civil liberty. I am asking you to help the exploited, not the exploiters. You have a tremendous opportunity here. I'm asking you as individuals to have the courage, because I think it's what you will need, to actually be willing yourselves to go and cut that woman down and untie her hands and take the gag out of her mouth and to do something, to risk something for her freedom. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm going to submit into evidence a copy of Linda Marciano's book, Ordeal, which I understand you have not seen. She testified before you yesterday. I ask you, when you come to make your recommendations, think of her. The only thing atypical about Linda is that she's had the courage to make a public fight against what's happened to her. And whatever you come up with, it has to help her or it's not going to help anyone. Thank you very much.